Good evening, and welcome to Inside the Rookery, Season 7, Episode 5. I'm the patron, and I'm here to welcome you to a special stream.
About dark deeds.
That's
Welcome.
a lot sultrier than I ever imagined the patron being.
What can I say?
No, I roll with it. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Welcome today Mark Gibbons and Andy Law, two of the rooks from Inside the Rookery, from behind the Rookery Tower's doors, to talk about the second edition of Dark Deeds, which is coming soon. Good evening to everyone in chat. Good evening to Rogan, to Josie. Hi Josie, get well soon. And to Seagoat. As always, I've got loads of questions prepared from patrons on our Discord server. Pop your chats in the chat, pop your comments and questions in, and I'll bring them up on screen. But now, without further ado, I shall hand over to Andy and Mark to say anything they'd like to say before I begin my relentless questioning.
Yeah. No, let's bring it on. Your wishfulness.
I'm tugging me forelock.
Excellent. So we'll get straight into it. Lazy Cat asks, what is Dark Deeds? We talked about Dark Deeds a couple of weeks ago, Mark, with you. So if people are interested to hear more about the journey that you went on when creating the first Dark Deeds and the artistic journey you went on in creating the second edition, do go and check that stream out. But today we're going to go a deep dive into the rules, the differences, everything about the second edition. So hit us with the pitch. What is Dark Deeds?
It's the game of malicious minions. It's a card board hybrid for 2 to 5 players about sneakiness, deception, backstabbing, robbery, currying favor of a shadowy patron, yourself, Lindsay, in this instance. It's a fun beer and pretzel evenings, role play light. Entertaining adventure.
Yeah, I pretty much agree with all of that. I came to Dark Deeds much later than Mark for, I think, pretty obvious reasons, given that he was in with the first edition. I hadn't played it until Mark said, "Hey, Andy, look at this!" And I had no idea what to expect. I had a name, I had Mark's attachment, I had Andy Chambers' attachment, Ryan Miller as well, and little more than that. So for me, what is Dark Deeds? It was a glorious awakening to a really fun game that I had not yet played. And for those of you who know me, I have played pretty much every game under the sun, but I missed its release entirely. So when Mark suggested sitting down and doing a second edition of it, it wasn't just a, wow, this is super fun. It was a, wow, what can we do to ensure that it's also super, super slick? For all that the first edition was brilliant already, it's always cool to go back to things and see what you can do to tidy things up. Or after several years of playtesting, playing the game, see what things you would have done differently on a second time round. So being a part of that was, for me, the best. But if I was going to sum it up in a pithy sort of thing, it's just a really, really fun game that both allows you to interfere with others a little bit, but most importantly of all, just have a laugh at a table with some friends for about an hour. It's just great.
No spoilers, there might be a question about game length later. So Killer Chandra asks, what are the differences between the new edition and the old?
Well, there's 6-7 years of sort of revisions and fine tuning. A couple of fundamental changes to the structure of the game. Lots of new art. We switched out a 1d12 for 2d6. Streamlining and polishing. A couple of fundamental changes to the way the game works, which was done in response to some of what they call pain points in the industry, right? After you get a certain amount of feedback, you want to dive in and fix the things that weren't quite working for one reason or another. For me, it was always an opportunity to revisit a game that I thought should have been a big hit and was. We sold every copy we printed, but we didn't print that many. I think first time around, we did it with a very small publisher who'd never done a game before. We were wildly indulgent with things like quality of components, because Andy Chambers and I just got carried away with it. Well, let's have wood and let's have metal and let's have a little burlap sack and all that kind of stuff. And then when the publisher turned around and said, "Oh, that's going to cost this much to put the game out," and we're like,
Oops.
Okay. So we wanted to address that again, just so it was something that we felt that people wouldn't hesitate, when it came to picking it up in the store. The practical side of that, wanting to get as many people to play it and enjoy it as possible. So we wanted to tackle any barriers to that glorious ownership.
We're going to take a little side question, because one's come in the chat directly for you, Mark, and I didn't know you did this, so maybe they're really secret. Mr. Gibbons, when will you be doing more deep dive, secret, unpublished Warhammer knowledge on your blog? Is this something you do, where you spill all the beans about your time in the studio?
If so, where do I read these things?
Yeah.
I don't have a blog, so you sure?
Right?
Unless the blog is so secret, I don't know I have it.
It's your dark underside, your darker half that likes to post from the past. Hamid, if you're meaning something like his Facebook post, where he often pops some art online on Facebook over on his group, we'll say a couple of nice things about, I did this, it was awesome.
Clarification equals akin to what Michael Kirkbride did after he left Bethesda.
Yeah, this was more aspirational and something that you were looking for, Hammond, rather than necessarily something that had occurred.
I've done a few. There's a few interviews I've done lately. Some of which have come out, some of which haven't come out yet. And it's I talked a little bit about my experiences at the studio and what changed between my tours of duty there. But I don't know that there's anything I've got left that I haven't already clarified. I think I've sort of been pretty upfront with
the patron will ruthlessly pump in from information later and report back. I'm
always if you've got a question for me specifically, I'm always happy to answer those.
Right. So I'm going to go back to the other question as well, because we didn't quite cover everything there too. So the previous one, Lindsay, which was what's changed between the editions. So for me, I would say an awful lot, while simultaneously ensuring that the core game is identical to what was there in the first edition. For me, it's little things like tweaking all the maths behind the scenes to ensure that there was the correct number of cards at the correct values, allowing you to get the correct favor. Favor is the equivalent of victory points, because you're seeking the favor of the mysterious, or slightly red and mysterious, patron over there, and ensuring that everything added up correctly, not just for a 2-player game, but for a 3 and a 4. So when you got multiple players sitting around the table, ensuring that the correct number of cards could come through to ensure you could complete your dark deeds, which is your secret missions that no one else knows that you have, that's been given to you by the patron. So there's that. Obviously, the art. There was also just going through the rulebook with an extremely fine tooth comb. Every single last word was checked, just to make sure that it was as easy as possible to grasp and also reference, because there's one thing that, if any of you out there play board games at all frequently, you'll know that at one point you'll say, "Oh crap, I need to look up a rule." It's a common thing. And all too often, it's not necessarily as easy to find that rule as you'd initially expect. So ensuring that was nailed into place, ensuring that, in fact,
unboxing.
Ensuring that the rules were super, super clear, ensuring that every rule had its own thematic term so that it was super easy to find, and it also drilled home what Dark Deeds was with everything that we did. So it wasn't just points, it's favor that you're looking for, because you're seeking the favor of the patron. So in general, I would sum that all up as it's a complete rework, while simultaneously being very much the same game as what came before, but now much more balanced, much more, hopefully, clearer, so that pretty much no matter your level of play, you're going to be able to get into it straight away. So,
some of the criticism that the first edition got was that it was a bit swingy, it was a bit dependent on luck. There was not a great deal of strategic choice. And I think while the game was still very fun and very flavorful, those were elements I thought, we could. Okay, how can we fix that? How can we address those concerns and just remove them as best as we can. I mean, there's always, obviously, any game that has dice and cards, there's going to be an element of luck and an element of unpredictability when you sit down to play the game. But what was important for us is that the players always had strategic options to deal with the vagaries of fate during the game.
100%. I mean, that was something Mark and I discussed again and again and again, was ensuring that no matter how the game unfolded, you always felt like you were a part of the ongoing favor grab as you were all chasing your various dark deeds. And you also didn't necessarily know how well everyone else was doing as well. So the amount of favor you've collected during the course of the game is always secret. So you're never quite sure how much they've got. And that's also super important. You know how many cards they've got in terms of how much favor, but not how much they're necessarily all worth. Meaning that even if you're perhaps falling behind, you can never be quite sure, which means you've always got a reason to keep pushing on. But it's also worth saying, because there's now a little bit more in terms of strategy. If you feel one person's getting really far ahead, there's a bunch of cards that can interrupt and mess a little bit with other people playing. So you tend to find that during the course of play, stories start building, because you're like, this person's getting ahead. They're the most suspicious minion. All the various watch patrol are chasing them all over the place. They've got lots of dark deeds done. And the other minions start looking at that person going, oh, really? Well, I'll be nabbing your equipment. And you start choosing the person who everyone thinks is ahead. While the sneaky little minion at the back, who's perhaps secretly logging quite a few big point cards, is not necessarily getting the same attention. And that's part of the fun of the game. And even if you've played it multiple times, if you can play someone for the first time, once they've played their first couple of turns, they've got it. And they're quite able to not just join in, but completely mop the floor with you, which is one of the things that I particularly love about the game.
So there's a few probably quick questions to go through. Martin asks, how long does a typical game last?
It's about an hour once you're sort of familiar with the rules. Yeah, it was roughly about an hour.
Yeah, about an hour.
Hammond has clarified it was Graham Davis. Hi, Graham. A little bit a miss who has a
Graham did do that.
Oh, I see. I didn't even know that. I should know. You know.
Yeah. I did a couple of guest posts over on his blog at one point.
Yeah, and we do have this question. Someone did pre-submit the question, but Seagoat's asked it in chat, so it has been asked already. But why swap out the dice?
I was told, because I don't do maths, I was told that 2d6 was better than the one. One of the problems was the swinginess, and a d12 is a swingy dice. So if you go to 2d6, it's on the curve. Andy can explain all the maths behind that.
Right. It's to help. Right. One of the great things with games that are designed to be super fast, super fun, and super simple is ensuring that anything like maths never hits your actual gameplay. You want it to all be handled behind the scenes. And as has been noted, a D12, which was the original way of trying to beat a number inside the game, can give you 1 in 12 results. So you get 1 in 12 results, and it's equally spread across them. So if it's a difficulty 6, that'll be like 6. You got about a 50% chance. Where if you're using 2d6, for those of you who know your little bell curves, as it moves towards the middle, a far higher concentration of numbers sit there than on the ends, meaning that you've got far more than 50% in the middle chance of success. One of the important parts of playing this game is ensuring that even when you fail, you don't feel like you fail too much, and that everything is achievable, everything's within reach. And if you had it on a D12, it was just way too swingy. Sometimes you'd miss, sometimes you'd hit, and it was luck-based rather than allowing you to calculate the odds if you wish to do so, and go, bop, that's the better option. Cut a long story short, without going into all the maths, because it's only 2d6, the maths aren't that complicated, but there's enough of them that it's not worth discussing it in the stream. It balances out the cards so much better. So much better in terms of both how you creep around, because there's a stealth mechanic in the game as you attempt to creep past guards, but also in terms of how you take out nasty nemesis, the people that the patron wants to take down, or alternatively, guards that you don't want to creep past. You could just stab them in the back if you want, because you are, after all, a wielder of a trusty blade, ready to stab it into anyone. Obviously not the other minions, because they're the patron servants, and you would never go against the patron servants. So It's all about ensuring that the game has got a more easily controlled set of numbers to ensure that it's fun. With a
And
D12, there was frustrating failure all too often.
And from a player's perspective, when you have the choices of what you're going to do, whether you're going to sneak past the guards, whether you're going to go for an emesis, whether you're going to rob a citizen, it's much simpler and easier to make those strategic choices when you have a little bit more understanding of how those dice might fall and what the chances of your success is, rather than just being like, well, like that one's really hard, like I might be able to do it, I might not. It's, you know.
Yeah, there's one thing you can say with an almost absolute certainty, and that's that almost everybody out there knows how to use six-sided dice. And they kind of intuitively know all the odds because they've been playing games with them since they were kids. And adding two dice together, everyone knows that 7 is the best and easiest, most common result. And anything above or below is going to be less or more easy to immediately score. So yeah, it's more intuitive. It's also more accessible to people who are used to just using normal dice. I have no problems with using other dice. That said, it's just in this particular instance, 2d6 was so much better for the number distributions. Just so much better. Yeah. Many a spreadsheet.
There you go.
So Kaleshandra asks, when creating this new edition, was there any design goals that were always kept in mind?
I mean, certainly the quality level. We were deliberately, consciously making a game that was more cost effective to produce, right? So we decided early on there was going to be no wood and no metal and no sort of we weren't lavishing attention on additional unnecessary bits and pieces, but it was really, really important that we still kept a supreme level of quality in everything that we did. So going into the components of the designing of the box, the quality of the cards, the rule book, all the dice. We've got custom dice, and they're beautiful, absolutely beautiful. Some of the prettiest dice. I
really love them.
And it was just making sure that, although we, again, trying to make something that would reach a wider audience, it was vital that from a quality perspective, we still kept that sky high. That's from the physical side, from a design point of view in terms of the rules. As we've said, just addressing any of the feedback that we've had in the 8 years since the first edition was out, ensuring that any stumbling blocks that players had, particularly new players, there was a couple of mechanics that first time you played the game took a little bit of effort to wrap your head around, and we wanted to ensure that we addressed that. Ideally, we sort of took those things out and made the game immediately accessible. So the first time you play the game, by the second turn, you go, "Oh, I got it now. I understand."
Yep, totally.
So yeah, that was always the accessibility and quality. Yeah.
I want to re-stress the accessibility part because Mark and I had quite a number of discussions on this because there was so many potential options for cool little things we could have added. And every time we sat down, there was a quick conversation of, this is what we've got. We could do this, do we? And every single time it landed on a no. It doesn't make the game better. It makes it more complicated. It actually confuses affairs rather than clarifies them. And in that rare occasion when we hit one that we went, oh, that sings, we go, right, well, if this really works and if we want to use that, we can use that for an expansion later for people who really like the game. So if we get to the point where we've sold bucket loads of them and an expansion's on the horizon, we already have a potential for that with just the work that we've done on our first development goals. But I would like to stress just how good Mark was on this particular part, because I've worked with lots of people on games in lots of different capacities, and Mark had a singularity of vision for what he thought that the core rules should be, not necessarily the actual writing of them or the numbers or anything like that, more the simplicity and clarity. It was clearly a core goal for him, and to begin with I was like, is this wise? And the answer was yes, it absolutely was, ensuring that you understood what the game was about. And that was established right at the beginning when we first sat down. We were going through all the different options and he was like, nope, it needs to be this. And I was like, right, I'll make sure that everything that we bring forward and everything that we discuss always has that in mind. And even when we're going outside those boundaries, we always know why we're doing that because we're checking to make sure that what we're doing is correct. And the answer was, in every single instance, yes, we were correct. It was an exceedingly pleasing step-by-step process as we worked our way through it, because it's rare you can take a game that's already got a very clear tone and really sharpen it to such a degree. I was very pleased with where it landed in the end.
I'm going to take a few comments from the chat. Creative Fussy said, is it possible to order a signed copy of the game?
I would we haven't got that set up at the moment, but I think once we get our hands on the actual production copies, I would hope so.
Yeah, I would hope so too. Yeah, I think that's definitely something that could be organized.
Or just come to a show where we're at and pick it up there, I suppose.
Yeah.
Infoflux, one has to admire Lindsay's dedication to makeup. Thank you. My hands look like the chorus of a Shaggy song, and my bathroom looks like a bloodbath has happened in it. So that is later on Lindsay's problem. For now, the
Surely
patron
you've got a minion. Surely you have a minion. You can.
the patron does not do her own cleaning. Some chat about maths. Let's just clarify. It's not about the sum. Seagoat says, but for 2d6, there's more maths than 1d12 because the players have to add.
Yep. But the background maths, as in what's going on behind the scenes,
as opposed to
so much more that can be worked with the 2d6.
Yeah.
And these are all the things that, as a player, you don't interact with because they're the things that lie behind everything. The numbers that are chosen, exactly where the numbers are, how often they'll come up, what the odds of those coming up are.
And
indeed. And the game also has a host of loot cards. These allow you to get little bonuses on your various attempts to sneak by people or stab them in the back or anything else. And ensuring that the challenges that the game presented were both achievable and also a challenge. When you've got yourself just a straight D12, the maths are, as you say, super simple, but they're swingy. Even no matter how skilled you are, the odds of doing a particular thing oddly don't get that much better as you gain the bonuses, but they get significantly better when you're using 2d6.
Yeah, that was a big thing. Even as recently as a couple of weeks ago, I had a bit of a crisis moment about numbers on some of the Nemesis cards, and Andy had to talk me down off the ledge. And that's what I wanted him to do. I said, these seem a bit easy to beat. And I don't know, the Nemesis, shouldn't the numbers be higher? And he had to calm me down and go, well, no, it's look at the broader picture and look at the enjoyment of the game. And they're tuned perfectly for a fun, challenging, hours gameplay, and they're fine as they are. I'm like, yeah, oh yes, they are. Yes, you're right. Yes, you're right. Okay, I'll go away again. So yeah.
Yeah, totally. And it's worth stating, just to make sure we're clear, because this is all math-based. This is behind-the-scenes math. This is all the stuff that you as a games designer work out as you're working the number of cards, exactly what modifiers they provide, what they do. But when it actually comes to the play, you're just rolling 2 dice. It's as simple as that. So the actual gameplay is exceedingly simple.
Well, there's also
what's going on behind the scenes.
Yeah. There's also a number of occasions when you're asked to roll 1d6. Now, if you only got a D12, then you've got to do division, which is much harder, as we know, than addition, right? You've got to roll your 1d12 and then half the number. Well, what if you roll an odd number? You know what I mean? So then it starts to get a bit crazy. So yeah, that's another reason to go to 2d6, so you can occasionally roll 1d6.
Just a big shout out to the World Anvil folk. I feel pretty honoured because I was on a stream last night and they've raided again tonight. So I feel amazing. Thank you. How you second hand light up the board game. Thank you. So Martin asks, what sort of play area do you need?
Pub table, beers, preferably. It's hang on.
Yeah, you're gonna do it. I was just doing it myself. I was just reaching behind. You're on it though. You've
got the street board that you play, the cards come down, but you've also got decks that sit above and decks that sit below this, and your own little corner. I mean, a good sized dining table, really. It's a bit bigger than the first edition because we got additional card decks that weren't there, that were rolled into some of the other decks in the first edition. So It's a little footprint's a little bit bigger, but you know, a regular gaming play area, nothing crazy.
Yeah, it's quite a small area, and you've got your own cards that you're holding in your hand. So if you want to include your cards, that's there.
Yeah,
and as you successfully do things, they go down in front of you. But it uses very little space.
You have your own little corner. You've got a score pile that you set up. You've got cards in play, cards in hand, and then the central area, which is the street with decks above and below it.
Absolutely.
Medium-sized table.
Yeah. And importantly, for the whole pub game angle, you do indeed have a part of your turn where you go to the pub. Because it's an essential component of all minions that they occasionally go to the pub. And while they're there, they can lay low and hopefully avoid the watch, or alternatively go try and find themselves extra dark deeds or concoct new plans to try and take down their foes.
So Lepin asks, where would you put this on a scale of complexity between, say, fun party game and something like Scythe or Twilight Imperium? Traditionally, that's a wide scale, especially if you think of fun party game could just be like charades. Like there's no cards, there's no pieces. It's just me. So what do you think?
It's very close to fun party game by intention and design. The whole point of it is it's meant to be fast, fun, easy to play, and it's the actual game itself and the outcomes that you get that make it super entertaining. All the cards are very funny, and some of the combinations of equipment you get are proper silly. The art that Mark did was stupendous for adding extra character. Whether it's grabbing yourself a nun's habit, and it's a picture of the nun that you've grabbed from behind, skirting along with hands out to either side going, "I'm a nun!" It's actually astonishingly brilliant. So the game is right on to the fun party game, a little bit more complicated than charades. I mean, you've got cards, but not that much more. The point was it was meant to be very easy to engage with, but it does have, as us game designery folks love saying, emerging complexity. That doesn't mean that the game itself becomes more complex. It's just as you realize that cards interact with other things, you can go, oh, strategy. Yeah. And that was one thing that Mark and I discussed at length when we were working our way through it. How can we ensure that even though the game rules themselves are super simple, the game is very easy to engage with, how can we ensure that that doesn't stop people who are looking for a bit more depth getting entertainment out of it? And getting that sweet spot that lay in between was, it was actually quite a push, because again, lots of behind the scenes maths to make sure all the numbers work nicely. But I think it's not just landed in a good place, it's landed in a really good place. Every single time we've demoed it with other people, or we've had people play test or whatever it might be, they always come back with stories. And that is the emerging complexity. They always come back and say, I had this, then such and such stole it off me, this occurred, and then we got the perfect card, meaning this could happen. Then this patron came down, and I missed my dark deed, and they always have something to say, and they're always engaged with whatever it may be as to how well they won or they lost. And the storytelling that comes out of it is, for me, the best bit of it all, because everyone's got their own unique take as to how the game unfolds, because I don't think I've played a game twice, three, maybe even 5 or 6 times in a row that is even close to the ones that are previous, because there's just the right amount of cards to ensure that everything feels fresh each time.
Yeah, I mean, the last game, I've talked about this before because I still wear the badge of shame. I've never been spanked so badly in a game of Dark Deeds as the last game I played with Lindsay. I finished, she won the game with like 80 favor points, which is unheard of. And I had 3, which is, again, unheard of in terms of the terribleness of it. And it's because all my fiendish plans all absolutely fell apart towards the end of the game. And it's just my schemes just collapsed around me. And I was just...
it's kind of like... You know, like in Ticket to Ride, you've got to kind of plan those long routes and those short routes and decide whether you want to pick more routes. It's kind of like playing Ticket to Ride when the other player can just like push your train track off or tip something over or bomb your station. Like, it's kind of like that pesky train robber. Oh, thanks. I hear that's called elf bullshit in some circles. Seagull always hits the pub when I'm trying to lay low and avoid the watch.
See, you understand. You already have half the rules.
There you go.
Does the pub sell tenants or harp on tap?
Oh, excellent question. What would be the Dark Deeds drinks of choice?
Well, harp at least has got that fantasy edge to it. You could almost imagine a play on harp. Although Tenants, I can almost imagine the Doctor serving that.
I feel like it would be quite cool to have a beer called Lute, but spelled Lute. So while you're on the street for your loot, but you also go to the pub for your loot.
There you go. There you go. Branding. Nice. Yeah.
Love it.
Well, we need to team up with a local brewery somewhere, don't we?
Yeah. And the Patreon, of course, doesn't drink draft beer.
Oh no, well, it's micro brewed, exclusive small batch whiskeys and stuff like that.
No, full on cocktails all the way for the Patreon.
Oh yeah, that's true. Yeah, we definitely need a Dark Deeds cocktail.
Dark Deeds, right? Yeah, we could just call it Dark Deeds. I'm going to think about that.
Right.
I feel like it should have like some kind of dark, like Tia Maria or creme de coco or something like that in it. I feel
needs to be red. There needs to be something
red down to black.
Oh my, yeah.
Yeah, like a layered one. I'll have a think about that.
Right.
I'm on it. Selection. We should make a selection and then get people to vote on which is the best one.
Oh, that's a good idea. I like that.
Yeah, like Guinness. You know, what are the little mini Guinnesses called where you've got like, they're not mini Guinness, but they're a shot and they look like a Guinness, but they're not. I can't remember what they are. I always have them with my team when I used to go out with my team in my last job. It'll come to me. But you could kind of have that, but instead of it looking like a Guinness, it would look like a little black and red instead of black and white. It needs to
look like a poison, something very, very dangerous to drink.
Thanks, Josie. This is my finest parenting moment when my child is telling me what the cocktail is called. Espresso martini is good. We could maybe do that with something pink. Anyway, I digress. How quick is it to set up?
It's quick. You've got a couple of decks to shuffle, and you just got to divide the decks up, lay them out, and you're good to go. There's a card called the Brute Squad, which is a special card that goes into the sort of the bottom quarter of the deck, which means the end of the game is unpredictable, because that's one of the things that we found that we really liked. That sort of not quite sure when the game is ending. So there's a little bit of setup on that, and then really it's just shuffling decks and laying them out. It's pretty straightforward. A couple of 5 minutes.
No, not even that. It's super fast. If you were to rate it on 1 to 5, it's a 1. In terms of setup, there's very little to do, and it is super easy. And just to note on the old Brute Squad coming out and making it unpredictable, that's one of the things that makes the game super fun, because as you're playing, you've got your Dark Deeds, you have to complete those because nobody says no to the patron, and sometimes inevitably you fail them, so instead of gaining points, you lose points. But as you make your way through the game, you reach that sort of point in the middle where you've done a bunch of Dark Deeds, you've got maybe one that you're working towards, and another one comes up and you're like, I could take that, but will I get it done in time? And you don't know, because you don't know how long the game's going to last for. It could last for all the cards that are left on the street deck. The street deck is the deck that describes all the various characters that are making their way down the street that you can loot or stab or whatever else that you intend to do. So you're not quite sure how long this game's going to last for, so there's always choices. And that was ultimately, as we were working our way through everything, the core design point, I suppose, which was ensuring that you always felt like you had something you could do, and you'd never reached the point of rote where you were just doing the thing because that's what you do. It was always a choice. So it was constantly interactive on your game turn, and that was part of the fun. And just that little Brute Squad at the end changes the whole dynamic of the whole game. If it was fixed at the end, then you could just try and calculate ahead, ahead. So there's that many turns left. Exactly.
Yeah. And one of the other reasons for introducing the Brute Squad represents the curfew, and as soon as the Brute Squad appears on the street, no more cards are drawn. So you could, which means there's up to a dozen cards sat there that never get to come out, and you might have a Dark Deed that relies on a card that's in that deck that's never going to see the light of day. So again, there's that tension of it's not like with the first edition of the game, every card made its way down the street. So you knew that a card that would let you fix that Dark Deed was inevitably going to come out, and then it's just a scramble to see who manages to sort of to execute on it. So now you don't know that because of the curfew comes in. It just adds that extra unpredictability to it. And then, as you say, once the brute squad appears, it's a mad scramble to get rid of any nemesis that are chasing you or any dark deeds in your hand that you haven't completed yet. So it's that, it ensures that the end of the game rises to a crescendo.
Yeah, absolutely. Can't stress how much that is definitely the case. But just if you're sitting there going, well, that sounds like it might get trapped with things in your hand you can't use, that will suck. Well, yeah, it does. But there's also cards that allow you to transfer dark deeds to other people when you panic and you realize the game's about to come to an end. And you can hold that right to almost the end and just go, ha! But there's also cards that can stop it, that literally say sod off. And that's part of the fun of the game, that interaction you have with others. It's not heavy interaction. There's just enough that you're constantly able to hopefully execute what you want to do and maybe ruin someone else's day every once in a while too.
Yeah, that was what feedback we got, particularly from my friends that when they started playing the game way back, is that there was a couple of cards in the original game that allowed you to mess with other players. You play a plot card and it messes up their day. And the feedback I got from my friends was, we want more of that. We want to mess with each other a lot more. So when we made Darker Deeds, which was the expansion, we put more of that stuff in. And then now with the second edition, we've sort of tightened all those little mechanisms up, and again added more cards. There's cards that you can play not on your turn, so it encourages players to watch other players and hold a couple of cheeky little plot cards in reserve to drop at a key time to mess with somebody else's strategy.
Which again is an important part of ensuring that everyone feels engaged, and as the story is developing, according to what choices have been made, everyone feels like they've got a way to contribute towards that as well. Keeps the game exciting, interactive, and working as a group game rather than just everyone squirreled away doing their own little thing on their own turn, which is good for certain games, particularly if you're playing big strategy games where you might be trying to build some sort of game engine in those. But this is meant to be a fast, fun, interactive game. So it was important that those cards were not only there, but were impactful and there as well. Yeah, it's good.
I'm going to go through a few and then come to one in the chat from Lepin about the roles you took when you were developing. So Martin asks, is there a potential for a player to be knocked out of play? No.
No. Even if you get arrested, you like spend the night in jail, you lose all your loot, and then the City Watch kick you back onto the street. So no, you're never out of play.
And for me, that's absolutely core. There is nothing worse than playing a group game, getting knocked out, and everyone else having fun for 20 minutes or an hour while you're sitting twiddling your thumbs. Boring. Indeed, not only was this a core point that definitely couldn't happen, but a constant background buzz in our minds was ensuring that even if you're falling behind in play, which very much can sometimes be the case as it can in any game, you always had to feel like that you had a chance of winning. You also had to feel like there was that ability to get the perfect set of cards played off with Dark Deeds, or if you thought someone else was in the lead, to possibly pass over one of your failed Dark Deeds to them or some equivalent. So always feeling like there is that chance. So right up to the end of the game, everyone feels like they're a part of that game and can win. It's an important component of ensuring that it's fun for not just the person that wins, but for everyone. As they go, oh, I was so close, or oh my goodness, I was so far away. I only got 3 points. What the hell? How did it land like that? How did you get so many points, Lindsay? Were you cheating? So yeah.
I wasn't cheating because we were playing it on Tabletopia, so it would have been
there you go. I mean, what if it's clear in a 3, 4, 5 player game that one player is doing exceptionally well, there's a natural tendency for everybody else to gang up on them. It's just,
Martin asks, you can gang up on others, but there's nothing to
I mean, ultimately, there's only one minion will gain the patron's favor. So there can only be one winner. And there's the rules. If there's a tie at the end, everybody loses. So it's important. It's important that you make sure that somebody wins.
Yeah, and not just if there's a tie. If the points are tied, then you check that you go through a series of things. But then if it's still a tie. The
Oh, yeah.
patron just didn't
Then
discuss.
everyone loses. Nobody gets a nice tie because the patron walks away in disgust, or has you walk away in disgust, sends you down the mines to do whatever it is. I'll also add that for all, yes, you can gang up on people. I think it's also worth saying that none of the cards are so impactful that they ever really mess with you that much. They're cards that impact the flow, they impact play. They're more likely to stop you from doing something you really want to do rather than stopping you complete a dark deed or something like that. It's all about interaction rather than ruining someone else's day completely.
Yeah.
So although the tone of it is very much, aha, you're a minion ruining each other's days, and it's super fun. The actual cards and what they do during play is much more lighthearted and fun. So it's lots of interaction around the table that builds fun stories and the ability to stop the other person from stopping you too. So it doesn't just stop with a quick, I do this, I will stop it. You can say, no, I'll stop you in return. It's super fun.
Yeah, there's one game we played where there was a master sword in circulation, which is like a +3 weapon, and it just kept getting stolen from player to player to player. They would all steal it back and steal it from each other to do an attack, and then it would get stolen back again.
And I think that's a perfect example of what screwing with other people's stuff is like in this game. It's not so much that you just ruin their day. It's like, I'll take that piece of equipment and then you'll do something with it. And then they'll say, aha, well, I'll take it back with this card. So you tend to find that it's one large interactive game space rather than necessarily everyone squirreled away in a corner.
Lepin's asked about your process for creating the game, but then they've also asked about the Rookery. So I'm not too familiar with Rookery. Do you have any other games or content released by this group? Do you have other projects in mind currently in the works?
Well, yes, we do. Okay, so creative process, that's actually really easy. We rock. And we are fully aware of each other's capabilities and strengths, and we do our very best to dial into those. Whenever we're starting something, we tend to have very clean discussions as to what we're doing and what the point of what we're doing is. And importantly, in, for example, Dark Deeds, we have a very clear who's making the decision on this one. With Dark Deeds, for example, Mark was making the final decision as to what rules may be or exactly how the art was going to express itself. He's the art director, after all. That's his job. Where I was on language. I was on ensuring that the rules were written as crisply and as cleanly as they could be. But that didn't mean that we weren't impacting each other in our various areas of strength. So, for example, everything that I wrote would go to Mark. Everything that Mark created would come over to my side, and we talk it all out, looking to try and fine-tune everything that we possibly could. As Mark said right at the very beginning of the stream, one of the core initial things that we were very keen on ensuring was that the quality was absolutely top-notch. And that doesn't just mean that the box feels good, which, by the way, it really freaking does. It doesn't just mean that the dice feel good. It means that every word has been checked, triple-checked. Every rule has been checked and triple-checked. Every single last illustration is doing exactly what it needs to do to characterize whatever it's doing. And we are all wearing our big boy pants, so to speak, or big girl skirts, depending on exactly where we're sitting. I like to wear both. But we're all quite capable of taking on criticism because you have to be. Because it's a situation where if it's going to be the best, you have to accept that your first, maybe perhaps second, or even fifth stab might not quite get it. And in a game like this, there's a lot of stabbing. Really quite a lot of stabbing. And when we were working our way through the rules, for example, there was not really any ideas pushed aside, while simultaneously we both knew exactly where it was going to go. But we were often talking things out as we were making our way towards it. So how do we work collaboratively? It's kind of like that.
We've got quite a lot of questions to get through. So just on this one, I'll just say go and visit our new website that is absolutely beautiful. That'll tell you more about us. We're an independent tabletop role-playing and games publishing company.
Yeah, our first game's
cool
coming
stuff.
soon. Oh, yeah.
Making cool stuff that we like.
And if you want, I will add one other thing. If you want to go and see what our roleplay material looks like, we actually have 2 products sitting over on Drive-Thru right now, little small taster ones, which are both beautiful. One of which is the Well of Bones. If you just type Well of Bones into Drive-Thru RPG, you will find it. The other of which is Mother Hoarfrost. Both of which are really rather special in their own rights. Go take a check. They're super cheap. They're only like $3.99 or $4.99 in dollars. So go take a check.
Okay, right. Is there a tangible difference between 2 players and 5 players? Because the game is 2 to 5 players.
Yes.
Yeah.
Maths. No, but yes, obviously a two-player game is very much,
Yeah, it's very much you against one other person.
Yeah. So the more players, obviously, the more players you get, the more that dynamic changes. I mean, we say 2 to 5, but I mean, there's nothing to stop you playing 6 or 7. I mean, there's a limit in terms of the number of cards you get handed out at the start. So probably 6 would be pushing it, but you could probably play 6.
Yeah, you could. 6 does push it. The cards are balanced to work on 5. The game is really quite different with the different number of players, and the actual mechanics work identically. What you have to do is identical. There's no change there at all, so you don't need to learn different rules if you're playing with a different number of players. But the street, which is where everybody wanders down and your minions wander up to and try to steal loot from the people wandering down it, or alternatively stab people that they don't like. That moves much more quickly when you're in a 4-player game, for example, to a 2-player game, in terms of how much it's moved by the time it goes back to your turn, because everybody's taking turns and before it comes back to you. So everything shunters down quickly, meaning that you've got to make very different decisions when there's more players, because your dark deeds, that's your missions, are probably going to be more difficult to do when there's more players. So you've got to be careful about which ones you go for, what you do. But when you've got more players, you can also make deals with folk, gang up on other people. So there's a completely different dynamic, whilst the rules themselves are identical. It was one of the, as we said multiple times, keeping everything simple was core, and ensuring that the rules were the same no matter how many people played was essentially, I mean, it was essential. But when it actually lands in, it plays out very differently for each, which makes it as much fun with 2 as it is with 4, but in a different way.
And how hard is it to learn? I would say so I came to it without knowing what the guys had done. So I hadn't played first edition. Didn't play it with them while they were playtesting between themselves. So I was one of the first, I guess, blind playtesters in a way. And I would say it's really easy to learn. Quite intuitive.
We played it with the marketing chap at Modifius recently, and second turn, I got it now. Yeah,
it was really good.
Yeah, just get it.
Yeah, it's one of those games that you start off and you go, right, so what do I do? I've got this, right, I do this, I do this, I do this. You see the next person take their turn, you go, oh, right, that means I could do this. Oh, that means I could do this, or I could do that. Oh, I've got this card, that could do that. Oh, and by about turn 2, you're not only playing it, you're understanding it and applying what you've understood to your next play and going, right, I'm going to try and get this dark deed, and I'm going to do it by doing this. Aha! And you often get, when it's your first game, someone's asking a question, something like, does that mean I can do this? And the answer is always yes, because the rules are so intuitive. And whenever they've tried to figure something out, the cards are super clear. They've got it right. So yeah, I'd say very easy in terms of complexity.
There's
very happy with it.
Quite a few questions on playtesting. So how much playtesting did you pour into this revision? When you were developing and playtesting, any ideas or rules that you discarded that you liked? And also, does playtesting differ because this is a second edition rather than the original?
Yeah, I mean, it's effectively 6-7 years of playtesting from player feedback, So by the time we sat down to do it, and we've been working on, myself, Andy Chambers, and Ryan Miller had, I guess, what you'd call Dark Deeds 1.5 in development about 3 or 4 years ago. So we got to a point where we had, I think, play tested as much as we possibly could. We'd put the game through all sorts of variations. We talked about new rules, additional rules, refining the original stuff. So by the time I brought it to Rookery, I other than a cleanup, a tidy up, a sort of clarification of terminology and stuff like that, and absolutely making sure that every rule was understandable. Any questions that Andy had as we sat down and sort of worked out the minutiae of it, I knew the answer to, because there's been 6 or 7 years of constant feedback on it. So I don't regard myself as a game designer, but I know Dark Deeds intimately. So there was never any kind of like, I don't know. I hadn't thought about that, because every possible option had been considered. at some point over the past, since 2016 when the first edition came out.
And doing the proofreading and looking at, we went backwards and forwards, didn't we, over sometimes when you're designing the game and you've written the game and you've played the game 100 million times, like the rules, you know what the rules should mean, but that's not what the English itself means. So that was quite, it wasn't just a proofread to look at, for typos. It was also a proofread to be like, does this actually explain to me?
Yeah.
I hate rules. Like, I'm not, Andy's my games butler, but this time I felt, I had to learn.
Yeah, I mean, that was also great. Despite what I just said, it was still awesome to have a new set of eyes on it, and our questions being asked like, "Oh, does that mean this?" I'm like, "Oh, well,
no,
yes. Well, no, oh no."
Uh-oh.
To clarify that point and ensure that there was no confusion. But yeah, because there's always questions. Oh, can I do this? One of the questions we always get early on was, "Oh, can I stack loot? Can I? What if can I wear 2 nuns' habits? Can I wear a pontiff's hat? Can I dual wield blessed bludgeoners?" Yes, you can. All loot is always stackable. You can pile up as much of it as you want. As ludicrous as that can sometimes lead to, as ludicrous a situation as that can sometimes lead to, that is sort of the point of it.
It is.
Yeah, and you can imagine this story, can't you, right? You're in your nun's habit and you're sneaking past a guard and they challenge you and they say, "You're not really a nun." And then you open your bag and you're like, "Yes, I am. I even have a change of clothes for Sunday service tomorrow." I really am a nun. And then they let you
I really am. Of course I am.
So, to answer Martin's one, is it different? It depends entirely on the nature of how this second edition is coming to pass. If it, for example, was an entirely new edition with an entirely new rule set that hadn't been really tested at all, then there'd be an awful lot of testing required. If it was, where in this case, where we've got ourselves an existing edition which had been refined over the course of many years, and it was now coming to the point of making what was there shine, making sure that every single last little bit of it balanced out, ensuring that all the odds were correct all the way through. In that case, not as much testing is required because all the original testing is already in place and we already know what is working and what isn't working. It's now about fine-tuning and making it the best it possibly can be and then presenting it to people again. And we had the Tabletopia version that was up and people were looking at that, and yeah, it's different, but ultimately it's the same job in the end.
So, Shadishian asks, how did you handle the tension? Actually, I don't know if I'm saying that right. Please correct me. Shadishian? Anyway, how did you handle the tension between quality and price? Did you do market research to gauge the price so you could set it and then design it, or did you just build it awesome and worry about the cost after?
First edition, we built it and worried about the cost after, and we got hit pretty hard in response to that. I think because again, with the first edition, we made it deliberately really small and incredibly high quality. So if you saw the game, if you were a potential customer and you saw the game, you'd go, "Oh yeah, that's awesome. I absolutely understand why you're charging $50 for it." But if you didn't, if all you saw was pictures and you thought, "Well, no, that's a game that's worth," you shouldn't be charging more than $30 for that, regardless of the quality inside it. So certainly coming back to the game, I didn't want that to be a conversation we were going to have again. So for me, it was always like the quality of the components within it. I want them to be as high as possible, but I just want to make sure there are, guardrails in place to stop me specifically going crazy. And insisting we have lavishing unnecessary amount of attention and expense on stuff that didn't really bring anything more to the table. If we had been doing like a Kickstarter where you have the sort of stretch goals and then maybe you can get indulgent and you can add all that extra stuff, it would have been a different kettle of fish. But it's important to me that we get this new edition in to as many players' hands as possible. So designing the contents of the box with that in mind, again, establishing the high quality, maintaining that high quality, but not getting carried away, not getting wildly self-indulgent, was the kind of, I had that in my head the whole time. We didn't gauge market price. We were told well, we said we'd love to be able to sell this at. And in order to do that, this is what we can do. So there was some bargaining. There was a back and forth. Okay, we want to be able to add this to the game. We want to do custom dice. What's that going to add to the cost? All that sort of back and forth was part of the negotiation.
Yeah, nailing down exactly what the components would be and what they'd be constructed from makes a big difference as well in terms of how you're going to put together the package for that print. But making sure that the components you do use are the highest possible quality they can be. When we went to our publishing partner, Modifius, hi Modifius, who are absolutely marvelous, they were completely supportive of every decision that we made. We went to them and said, this is what we want to do. And they said, yes, and this is how much that will cost in terms of the overall production, which means that it will have a unit price of this. But if we change it this way or change it that way, it will be this and this. And it was then, as Mark says, a negotiation. We sit down and we go, exactly how can we make sure that this is the correct price so that nobody gets intimidated by it, but at the same time we can actually produce it and get into as many hands as possible. So I think we've landed in the perfect sweet spot. It drips with quality, even right down to the nice shiny. I don't know if it's going to show, but it's got the spot UV in the front, so you get the nice shininess. The dice are absolutely gorgeous on the inside. All the components are just lovely. So yeah, it's good.
So Foolish Mystic Wonder asks, I might not get to hear this answer live because I'm at work and about to walk back into a session, but what's the best starting point when circling back to an existing piece of work like Dark Deeds?
I've circled it like a very thin, hungry shark for the last sort of 8 years. So I've always been dipping back into it. I've always gone, oh, I didn't really like that piece of art. So for me, it's kind of it was always sort of fixing some of the art and addressing the pain points. As I said, any kind of criticisms that have been constant of the original version, that for me were the first thing to address. And then it's okay, once we've fixed anything that might possibly be not broken, but people were like, well, that's a bit weird. I don't quite understand how that rule works. So once that's addressed, then it becomes about, okay, let's ensure that we give the rest of the game the same attention. Make sure we lavish every rule with that sort of scrutiny. Make sure the art is as good as it can possibly be. Because the first game was done I had like 4 months to do all the art for it. So I mean, that pressure does often help deliver a high quality result, because it's an intense cauldron of creativity. That's great. But there was a whole bunch of pieces I thought, I rushed that one a bit, or I should have given myself more time to develop the idea for that. So that was part of the desire. When I made the version for Tabletopia, that was I spent a fair bit of time on that at that point there, going in and saying, I'm just going to fix this art. Well, we had to add a whole load of new cards because the way the loot mechanic work changed dramatically. So suddenly it's like, oh, I've got to make separate loot decks. Well, we don't have enough cards. We don't have enough items. Right. Okay. Let's throw up a short list of items we want to add to the game, and some fun new mechanics for what those items might do. So that sort of grows organically over a desire to improve on what you did originally. And it was always, for me, it was always like, oh yeah, I'd love to dive in and do new stuff as well as refining the existing stuff. You say, oh, we need a dozen new loot items. I'm like, oh, great.
I have one sentence to say on this one. When I came in, was establish the design goals. Once you know what you're making, it's much easier to make it. Now, it might sound really obvious, but it's very easy to just randomly go off in weird directions because you don't actually have a clear goal as to what it's going to be in mind. And I asked Mark right at the beginning, what do you want from this? And he had very clear design goals in mind, which was super good because I could throw them back at him later and say, hey, Mark, it needs to be this because that's what you said. And he'd go, yeah, you're right. Excellent. And that just keeps it tight, because it's very easy, particularly when it's just a couple of you or a small team, when you have a cool idea to go, yeah, let's go chasing that and see where it lands. In this case, that would have been detrimental to getting it done.
It was a question earlier asked about ideas that we've discarded, or there certainly were that there were gameplay ideas that on paper sounded really, really good, and then we started testing them, and it was sort of they changed the flavor of the game or the feel of the game or the time it took to do a round of turns. It's kind of like, that is a good rule, but it's slowing the game down, and it's kind of like, no, I think we're going to have to try and introduce the concept of that in a different way. Maybe make it a plot card, so it's not a constant thing that players have to think about every turn, but it's one of those explosive and fun little moments. So all that kind of stuff is you reflect upon all that during the development and the fine tuning.
Yep.
So that's us reached the end of our hour. We've got a few more questions, but we'll keep them for another day. Things like solo play, longer games, legacy games.
Yes, all right, we'll talk about that another time.
But Mark, you did write rules for solo play for the first edition, so there is
I did, yeah, but they don't work with the new rules. But I would absolutely love to do a set of solo rules, possibly for an expansion.
Exactly. So all that remains to say now is please sign up on the link in the chat for Dark Deeds News if you're interested. We would love to hear from you. Check out our website, which is also in the chat. Join us on our Discord server. It's a lovely community. You'll all be very welcome there. There's plenty of people here in the chat, and I think you'll agree that we have one of the nicest chats on the internet.
Oh, yeah.
Totally. Join me if you're a Brazen Rooker above next Tuesday for a masterclass on bringing your characters to life.
Ooh.
And join us again next week for another episode of Inside the Rookery. But until then, thank you so much to my... I'm going to consider how well the minions did. Well, I think you both did equally as well as each other, which means you both lose.
Oh, no!
Until the next time, all that remains for me to say is thank you so much to our patrons who make this happen. And good night to you all. Cuckoo! Cuckoo! I'll see you soon.